So let's talk about the mighty armoured transport tanks of the Astartes, who are maybe looking a little bit more appealing with some recent points cuts. Let's talk about Land Raiders and Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Land Raiders, and with some recent points discounts on the big Astartes battle tanks, I thought it would be a fun time to revisit them, talking briefly about the lore and the models, and then go through each of the variant datasheets in Codex Space Marines, how they function in game, and any obvious buffs and synergies with them. Land Raiders are a certainly quite iconic staple unit of Warhammer 40k, big lump and armoured battle tanks, featuring some great big sponsor and weapons that are rather enjoyed by the setting. And they're basically great big Space Marine transport tanks and some of the heaviest armour that normal chapters of the Space Marines tend to field. They've got hugely thick adamantium plates, huge tracks encircling the vehicle, allowing them to go on near all terrain, a hold capable of taking entire squads of Astartes, and they're often used to deliver the chapter's elites into battle, maybe mighty Terminator armoured warriors or perhaps some Gravis Marines in the age of Primaris. When the tanks have disgorged their squads into the thick of the fighting, they're able to support the advance with heavy firepower, typically big sponsor-mounted Lascannons and heavy bolters on the hull, though there are numerous Land Raider variants throughout the galaxy, some more common than others. The Land Raider Crusader trading out the Lascannon power banks for an increased hold and chattering hurricane bolters to obliterate enemy hordes, or the Land Raider Redeemer developed by the Salamanders with its enormous flamestorm cannons on the side. However, they're equipped, Land Raider is an indomitable weapon of the Astartes' wrath, can continue fighting after enormous damage that might have wrecked a lesser tank, and have a powerful machine spirit able to assist the crew in times of need. The model itself has also been around for a good amount of 40k's history, Classic Plastic Land Raiders being the first battle tank that Games Workshop released in that material for the setting, originally in a box set of 2. The design looks a bit different to how we have it today. It doesn't have the front assault ramp, and kind of fun that Forgewell made a version of that same tank for the Horus Heresy, dubbed the Land Raider Proteus. The models for the 40k setting are really quite venerable in their own way at this point, the regular Land Raider hailing back from around the year 2000, currently costing $92 or £57, and the Land Raiders Crusader and Redeemer were released later. They're a bit more expensive at $115 or £71 or so. They're a more general range item where the regular Land Raider is an online only one currently. As well as those two options, they also have the Chaos Land Raider with an extra upgrades frame, swapping out a few parts from the original model. The models themselves are pretty well liked, and I feel like the majority of battle tanks tend to hold up pretty well. Maybe superfine details not being quite as huge an issue compared with infantry kits that don't really show their age so much. For the Land Raiders in particular, I really quite like the interactivity of the model. As you open the front assault ramp, the top door raises at the same time with a hinged mechanism, and the sponsons can rotate and pivot. I can't help but think they're probably likely on the agenda for an update at some point in the future though. Given their crew appearance is firstborn rather than Primaris, I feel like at some point Games Workshop's probably going to redo them in the same sort of style as the drop pod, though it'll probably be a bigger event when they do. If you were looking to pick one up in the meantime though, check out the channel's affiliate discount retailers linked down in the video description. They can save a bit of money versus Games Workshop, and any purchases made through those links specifically help to support Auspex Tactics a little. I believe some of those stores do have the regular Land Raider discounted, though for some of them it might just be the Crusader and Redeemer, given that the regular one's an online only item. Let's get into the datasheet rules for Land Raiders though. For some reason Games Workshop keeps them really quite similarly costed throughout the entirety of 40k. Maybe a little bit weirdly so, given that they have different value to different factions. In any case, one of the interesting things recently was that the regular Land Raider dropped down from 240 points to 220. That's really quite a solid points decrease of around about 8%, and certainly felt fairly relevant as a unit that does get played from time to time for Space Marines in competitive lists, though they are maybe a bit faction specific depending on which units you might actually want to transport with them. In any case, for your 220 points you get a great big armoured vehicle. The standard one moves 10 inches, though the other ones move a bit faster. For the main draws to the Land Raider, there's the durability, its transport capacity, and any damage the variant can do. Durability definitely feels like the Land Raider's strong suit. It's 16 wounds at toughness 12 with a 2+ save, they're pretty indomitable to take down, and particularly with a 2+ save it's going to get excess value from cover, armour of contempt, or the smoke stratagem if it's out in the open. It does have that keyword, as all of those tend to have maximal impact when you already have a high saving throw. It means that say if you're even shot by a multi-melter with AP4, you could still be saving on a 4+ if it was in cover and you used Armour of Contempt. It's not really the hardest to have a bit of it in cover as well with that really quite big profile. As a result, the biggest threats to it generally tend to be high AP weapons like melters or las cannons and things. Generally big anti-tank weapons like railguns and the like, high strength, high AP and loads of damage, or mass special weapons with some good AP and perhaps lethal hits or other special rules like +1 to wounds. In general though, for the points cost, they're all going to take a fair bit of effort to take down, and particularly so if you use some defensive stratagems. Then for what it can actually do in a game, basically a Land Raider needs to justify itself between the value that it brings from transporting units in combination with the damage it can do. The different Land Raider variants have different transport slot sizes. The regular variant with the Lascannons has 12, the Redeemer gets 14 with its Flamestorm cannons, and the Crusader gets 16. Units like Jump Packs, Wolfen, Terminators, Gravis, and I guess Possessed, fully Chaos Space Marines take up 2 slots, and Space Marine Centurions take up 3. So for normal sized squads, you can't fit in a squad of 6 there. In general, it usually makes sense to be transporting some of the most valuable things that you can field, as you usually want to have a good ratio of the amount of points in the transport to justify it, as opposed to maybe over-investing in a Land Raider to transport around some cheap troops or something that don't really warrant it. Then the big boost that it gets with transport is its assault ramp rule. This basically allows you to move, drop, charge. Normally you wouldn't be able to charge if the Land Raiders moved and then you disembark, and that means they're just particularly good transports for melee units. It means that out of the regular Land Raider, you'd move forward 10 inches, your squads would disembark 3 inches out the front, and then with an average 7-inch charge, there's a reasonable chance you could engage things up to 21 inches away, engagement range making up that last inch, and it could be a bit further with a Crusader or a Redeemer that go in 12 inches base. In reality though, that's very rarely going to be the case if you're playing on any sort of busy 40k 10th edition battlefields. Land Raiders have some pretty enormous profiles, and it's kind of unlikely you're going to be able to travel directly in one straight line. You might need to do at least some sort of moving around terrain, which could lessen the threat range by quite a bit. To get most value, it does mean that you might need to be a bit bolder and trust in its durability to keep it safe, as opposed to trying to keep it hidden. Land Raiders do generally need to make use of their transport slots, as even with decreased points cost, they just don't compete hugely well with other more direct damage dealer choices on damage and defense alone. And with units that really want to go in there, there's a fair few reasons that you might not want to use a Land Raider. Detachments that can advance and charge super easily might just be able to hide behind a ruin and then jump out. Armies with longer base moves like some of the Chaos Armies or Wolfen can go further, or Emperor's Children can advance and charge at base. There's less value for units that can deep strike like Terminators, as they've got another way to get close to the enemy and at least have a reasonable chance at a charge or rapid ingress. And again, it's going to be more valuable for units that actually care about not being shot, and for units that have okay durability in their own right, there might be a bit more argument just to taking more of that same unit as opposed to a Land Raider to transport them if they don't really need the protection that much. For Space Marines specifically, they're competing with the far cheaper Impulsor at 80 points. They're vastly cheaper, and they can be a good assault staging unit as well. The idea with these would be to charge out of them when they're stationary, so you effectively get a 9-inch move, you get to disembark 3 inches, move 6 inches out, and then make a charge for an average of 7 inches. And sometimes that could be just as good, if not better than a Land Raider, given that the infantry when they're moving out can just walk straight through ruined walls, in particular for detachments where you're able to advance and charge, say Gladius or Stormlands, or with a stratagem somewhere else. Jumping out of a regular transport vehicle has about the same sort of average threat range as a Land Raider with no terrain in the way, so for actually delivering units into melee, it's far harder to justify the Land Raider for units that can fit inside one of these, and it's perhaps even more the case for Rhinos, particularly for the Chaos Space Marines. It doesn't mean that every unit that can use an Impulsor is necessarily a bad idea, and even less so if you don't have a detachment where you can advance and charge, but maybe gets a bit more questionable if you both could go in an Impulsor and you do either have an army rule or a stratagem that could let you. For core Space Marines, it feels like things like aggressors that can't go in smaller transports, can't teleport in, and aren't particularly tough for the cost. They feel like a particularly natural target. The same for Assault Centurions. They are a bit tougher, but they're so slow that they really value the speed, and there's plenty of other options that could use an Impulsor. Maybe Blade Guard with a character support, such as Adrax Agaton or Judasir. Perhaps some Space Marine Stern Guard with a captain. They can be absolutely devastating between range and melee if they can do both into one target, and a Land Raider could get them there. Or something chapter specific such as Black Templar Sword Brethren and characters, or other chapter specific things, though all of those could use an Impulsor. Chapter specific Terminators and Assault Terminators might just be better teleporting into the action, maybe rapid ingressing, or perhaps foot-slogging across the board and trusting in their good armour. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in ObjectiveMarkers.com. Makers of some custom battlefield accessories that can work well for Warhammer 40k objectives, funnily enough. These are fairly commonly used things out there in Warhammer 40k. The idea is that you have a 40mm central marker on a circular objective disc, and then the edge of the disc is exactly 3 inches away from that, so you can super easily tell whether models are on an objective or not. The ones made by Objective Markers themselves are made of this clear flexible silicone, and then are overlaid with different designs, so they can add a bit of faction-specific theme while not detracting away from a battlefield surface. They've got a whole bunch of designs of them, including this faction-agnostic Auspex style one that they did as some channel merch. Any sales of this one in particular help to support the channel a touch. But beyond that, they have an absolute ton of other ones. Good ones for all your power-armoured warriors, ones that could suit your Golden Guardians, swarms from beyond the galaxy, Chaos factions, greenskins, or ones for all your robot skeleton needs. They're now shipped to a fair few more locations out there in the world, including the USA, Australia, and Europe beyond the UK. They also have a few other offerings, including their clear terrain-based markers. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring the video. You can find them links down in the video description if you'd like to check out their stuff. Getting back to Mighty Space Marine battle tanks though, let's talk about the Land Raiders' damage on weapons for the variants. While it's obviously not exactly the main focus of the tank, I would bear in mind they do have at least a tiny bit of melee threat. 6 attacks hitting on a 4 at strength 8 and damage 1. It's not really going to change the world, but might be enough to roadkill a few lighter infantry. The bigger danger for Land Raiders in close combat could be tank shock if you need it. With a toughness of 12, that means the average around about 4 mortal wounds give or take. And in a pinch, that could be really quite a big deal if it is the difference between finishing off a badly damaged enemy vehicle or road killing a character or a Terminator or two. In any case, for Land Raiders in melee, it was one quite nice win for 10th edition. Now it doesn't just completely stop them from being able to shoot if they're locked up by a Gretchen or something. Talking of the weapons and guns though, this is the main difference between the variants. The standard Land Raider gets 4 Lascannon shots plus a twin heavy bolter, and also mounts a hunter-killer missile and multi-melter on the top, and a few extra small arm shots from a storm bolter. It makes the Land Raider overall an interesting proposition, as well as doing all of its transport duties, it will meaningfully chip in to anti-tank fire and taking down tough stuff. Though realistically, and as you'd expect, it's not going to be quite as strong as a dedicated gun platform that doesn't do anything else. Given it went down to 220 points though, it certainly got a lot more efficient when compared with its competitors on this front. But taking a look at its damage dealing to hard targets, and including the shots for unbuffed Lascannons and the multi-melter assuming its 18-inch range, with average rolling you deal around about 8 wounds to a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle, obviously very swingy, or around 5 wounds or so to an enemy Land Raider if you look at a harder target. For comparison, and taking a look at the toughness 10 3+ save vehicle, a Space Marine Vindicator has pretty equivalent damage output there, around about 8 wounds, though a bit less than 40 points cheaper. The Gladiator Lancer does significantly more at around 10 wounds on average for just 160 points, and the Ballistus Dreadnought is cheaper still, doing around about 6 or 7. It means the dedicated gun platforms do beat it in a straight firefight, so you would need to be getting at least some value out of its transport capacity. Like several of the rest of these, it can pick up some pretty easy buffs in Space Marines though, both at moments fairly justifiable with quite this much firepower. Reroll hits and +1 to wound is going to be absolutely massive, even if it is admittedly good on most things. Incursors could make it hit on a 2+, and the others might be a bit more list dependent. Storm Speeders, maybe Combi Lieutenant buffs if the enemy happens to be on a midfield objective, or Tech Marine for a +1 to hit. It feels like maybe the easiest things to use with it though are just Oath of Moment, and the Incursors are a particularly easy one to spot for it. Overall, and particularly after the points decrease, the regular Godhammer Land Raider with the Lascannons is looking more interesting than it was. As mentioned though, it's not the only Land Raider variant in town. The Land Raider Crusader used to be the cheapest, but now it's the equal cheapest at 220. The biggest change for this one is that it swaps out the twin Lascannons on each side for a massive amount of Hurricane Bolter shots. Between the two of them, they get 24 shots within 12 inches, and all those shots are twin linked, so it is going to stack a massive amount of AP0 saves on any sort of lighter infantry. Though at AP0 and damage 1, even with that volume fire in the twin linked, it's not going to do very much to anything that's got good saves or toughness of 8 or more. Beyond that, this one trades out the heavy bolter for a twin assault cannon, which I'd say is probably a slight upgrade given the devastating wounds it gets. It is faster than the standard Land Raider as well, moving 12 inches rather than 10, so if you had a unit within it, you'd expect a bit more threat range out of one of these than elsewhere. And it also has a boosted transport capacity of 16, so that means that you could say have an aggressor squad with 2 attached characters alongside it. Also another interesting combos of multiple different units all piled within one Land Raider. Unfortunately though, I feel like the Crusader was just pretty niche before, downgrading some serious anti-tank fire into just masses of fairly inflexible small arms aren't really a great selling point for it. I don't think it's unusable, but I think it was overshadowed before. I'm surprised that this one didn't go down in cost when the other two did. It felt like this was the worst variant previously, and it's only been made more so relatively now. It was interesting to see Games Workshop try and throw the Black Templar Land Raider Crusader a bone. They had their own datasheet for that one with the Legacy of Gerulus rule, and that means that if you ping a target with one of its guns, the things that jumped out of it can re-roll ones to hit and wound against that target. That works at range and in melee, and that's genuinely a pretty meaningful damage buff. Overall though, it just really doesn't seem to be enough to overcome competition with the Land Raiders with heavier guns. Probably doesn't help that several of their best damage combos can re-roll hits anyway with Castellans built in, and Sword Brethren combos in particular can fairly happily jump out of Impulsors or Repulsor Executioners without needing the extended transport capacity. It definitely seemed like a nice enough buffing rule though. I feel like the standard Space Marine Land Raider Crusader would quite appreciate something like this if it doesn't wind up getting a lower points cost at some stage. Then we've got perhaps the really threatening one, the Land Raider Redeemer. This one was generally the most played variant previously, and it also got a very small points cut, going down from 280 points to 270. A nice nudge to make it very slightly stronger, though I feel like a 10-point cut on a 280 point model isn't really all that much, and unlikely to meaningfully move the needle on it in a big way. For its damage output, this one's the one with the great big Flamestorm cannons, each one getting d6 plus 3 shots at strength 12, AP minus 2, damage 2, auto hitting and ignoring cover. So that means that you're getting an average of 13 hits on an enemy that goes into barbecue range. That's already very punchy against lighter infantry or standard sized Space Marines. It's got enough volume fire that anything short of toughness 12 is going to feel that quite a lot as well. Beyond that, it's also faster like the Land Raider Crusader and also has a boosted transport capacity. The 14 model hold means that you can get, say, a maxed out unit of aggressors or eradicators plus a character alongside them, and that could make it more interesting for some purposes. Perhaps the very best thing about the Redeemer though is that you've got the potential to overwatch and just cause some enormous casualties for one command point here. Here's the average sort of damage that you might expect on a unit within range, maybe around 15 barbecued termagants and guardsmen between the Flamestorms, Multi-Melter and Assault Cannon, or around 7 intercessors, 3 terminators, 9 wounds to a toughness 10 vehicle, and still doing a bit of damage on average to a really tough one. The numbers won't be quite that impressive on Overwatch, given that the Multi-Melter and Assault Cannon will hit worse. There's still a good chance to pick up entire squads of lighter infantry, or 5-man squads of Space Marines just for one command point. The profile's pretty fine wherever it wants to be, though it absolutely loves the Salamanders and the Firestorm Assault Force. Vulcan's pretty immense in combination with the Flamestorm cannons and the Multi-Melter giving them big rerolls to wound. That makes its damage output go absolutely through the roof. If you're feeling super spendy, you could even potentially combine it with the devastating wound stratagem in Firestorm. It could just about be worth it against some high saves targets. Otherwise, it'll enjoy the +1 strength and assault keyword, perhaps a bit more after any cargo's jumped out. There's several transport relevant stratagems. It could be used to get some aggressors up close to Flamestorm and then charge in, though perhaps a better choice might be Adrax Agatone and some Blade Guard, giving you another squad that could use the lift into getting into melee range. You could even combine that with something else like a trio of Eradicators that are extra nice in Firestorm as well. Games Workshop do seem to have done well to bake in a whole bunch of synergies with the Salamanders and their favourite tank. Whether it's Salamanders or not though, the Redeemer variant's a pretty strong one. Overall, putting that all together, Land Raiders are particularly strong for the sheer amount of defence that they have, and the Godhammer and Redeemer variants do contribute to damage output in quite a big way. For downsides, they've got quite a big unit footprint, which can mean that they have to move around terrain and reduce the threat range of any units within. Their values may be a bit less if you've got a detachment that can advance and charge, or your damage combo can go in something cheaper, like say an Impulsor. Though with certain big units, a Land Raider could definitely be a good option, with a challenge then to make good use both out of its transport capacity and its actual overall damage and defence while it does that. A points boost to the 2 already better variants should certainly help it out a bit. For detachments, a fair few of them help out the Land Raider in one way or another. Gladius does support melee units alright, and Land Raiders might be able to make use of advance and shoot or the fallback and shoot option, plus things charging out of them might be able to get lance and extra AP with a stratagem as well. They do have a bit of anti-synergy with access to advance and charge though, so you might have a few more units happy enough to footslog behind terrain or jump out of an Impulsor. Otherwise, as mentioned, Firestorm is pretty massive for the Redeemer. Lots of strong synergy there, and it's not exactly bad for the other versions as well. Ironstorm, of course, has plenty of good stuff for big vehicles. Blanking your damage is particularly handy on a big tough Land Raider stat line, and so is being able to return fire and deadly demise, both of which could be easily worth it on such a big vehicle with so much value. The single rerolls could either help out Multi-Melters or Lascannons. Perhaps beyond those, most of the other stuff maybe tends to be a little bit more niche, maybe more incidental benefits to the Land Raider, if any. For chapter choice, any chapter with a good melee damage combo unit would be nice enough. Tor Garadon with aggressors could be delivered there. Ultramarines could potentially make use with Ventress or Calgar in a command squad. And as mentioned, Salamanders do well with the Land Raider Redeemer in particular. For the Divergent chapters, a few of them could work well on paper. I haven't really seen too many of them using Land Raiders for various different reasons. A lot of them just don't really seem to have the units that really fit the bill perfectly. Things like Dark Angels, Inner Circle Companions could be jumping out of an Impulsor. On Foot Death Company for the Blood Angels could fit the bill but seem quite niche. Black Templars are typically building around Sword Brethren more than Crusader squads at the moment, but I guess a 10-man squad of them with character support could be a good one on paper for a Land Raider. Maybe having more value in their detachments that can't advance and charge in their Codex. Space Wolves Wolfguard Head Takers could be another okay option, though most of the unique chapter Terminators that have them could probably do just as well via foot slogging and trusting in their armour, or deep striking and rapid ingressing. For this one, I'm mainly focused on the Space Marine Land Raider datasheets, but I would bear in mind that other factions have access to them too. The Grey Knights can take any of the 3 primary variants, though they've always felt a bit of a counterpoint to the faction's main rules with their teleport tricks to get them around the board, maybe having big bulky transports diminishing the value there. They could potentially be used to get purifiers to a closer charge range if desired. They can hit very hard up close, and teleportation isn't necessarily going to be able to get them there. The Lascannon Land Raider could do rather well with the Warpbane Task Force rerolls as well if it can keep them active. There was a top placing tournament list that did rather well with the Land Raider last week, though it seems the majority of Grey Knight players are using some Razorbacks for their transport needs if anything. It's fairly efficient with its good defense and Lascannon, plus a really good buffing rule. For the Chaos Marines and their Deity Legions, they can take the Lascannon Land Raider, and that also went down to 220 points. Though basically near enough without exception, they just don't really have optimal units to put in them. And basically for every single one, there's definitely a unit that you can use and isn't awful, but seems just to be a bit directly weaker versus putting units in Rhinos or foot slogging or teleporting them. For the power armoured variants, such as big squads of Chosen or Plague Marines, they're typically used with the much cheaper Rhinos, some of which have got some really good buffing rules now, like the Death Guard one. A few of them have their Shock Elite as Terminators, such as the Death Guard once again, and as with the standard Loyalists, they can just teleport in or trust in their armour to keep them safe, and doubly so for the Death Shroud with their close deep strike. World Eaters get very good movement stats just in their own right, so have less need for a Land Raider to get them where they need to be, and so do the Emperor's Children. The Emperor's Children getting advance and charge across the army again lessens the value of a Land Raider, and the Thousand Sons just don't really have big melee damage combo units that really justify a Land Raider. The Scarab Occults can be pretty happy teleporting in and lighting things up with shooting. Overall, between all of that, Land Raiders have been a bit of a luxury, though dropping down 20 points might make them a bit more justifiably so. They still do plenty of damage as mentioned, and more so than a Rhino does give you extra options for delivering something scary right into the heart of the enemy, even if it could be done more cheaply there. Finally, we've got the Adeptus Custodes. They get their Venerable Land Raider that hits on a 2+, which is quite a nice deal. If you are looking for raw anti-tank damage though, the Caladius tank still does that better. The Custodes can generally deep strike across the board, and they've got good defensive stat lines to keep them safe as they get there. There could perhaps be a little bit more draw to them to deliver some into melee if you're not wanting to take Blade Champions in every unit. I'm still not sure where at the cheaper points cost they'll be enough to tip the balance, at least compared with just taking another squad of say 5 Custodian Guard or more. Overall, Land Raiders tend to be really quite niche for those factions, though maybe a little bit more common for the Space Marines. Just to take a look at competitive use of Land Raiders prior to the points update, I searched through 20 high-placing Adeptus Astartes list recently, and it seemed 3 of them used Land Raiders, all 3 being the Land Raider Redeemer. One was a Salamanders list that looked like it had 2 squads of Blade Guard in it, with Adrax and a Judaseer leading them. One was carrying a squad of Assault Centurions who definitely enjoy being up close, and one was Imperial Fists carrying some Torgaridon aggressors. Otherwise, beyond that, from time to time in competitive lists in the past, I've seen people use the standard Land Raider, still very capable of delivering some Blade Guard combos or 3 Assault Centurions. Overall, they definitely weren't unplayed before, and both variants got a small boost, maybe not unreasonable to think that we might see a few more of them. I guess for Meta Space Marine lists often going for Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon now, it's probably not going to be so much of a choice for them, more the other more standard looking Space Marine lists. In any case though, if wanting to field a Land Raider on the board, I'd probably just go for the one of them. Probably still the Land Raider Redeemer, though the Godhammer I think caught up a bit, and it really wasn't too bad before, and then use that to transport your single biggest and scariest melee combo into the midfield. It's going to be far more viable in certain detachments than others, perhaps in particular the Land Raider Redeemer with Salamanders and the Firestorm Assault Force. That just gets so much value on so many different fronts that it's well worth it, and generally the game plan would be to keep it at least towing in so it's got some sort of cover save as it moves up. At the same time, still set it up with a clear movement lane so it doesn't really have to move too far to get around terrain. Be fairly brave and aggressive with it and roll it up to the mid-board and hopefully disgorge some angry Space Marines to make short work of the enemy in melee. If it starts to get focused, then Armour of Contempt is a pretty reasonable choice if there is any one big scary enemy unit that's going to be doing lots of damage to it, and doubly so if you've got cover. And then from there, Land Raider Redeemer seriously wants to be in Overwatch position to cover enemies that might want to try and make their way onto an objective. One command point spent on Overwatch could be a lot of dead enemy models in one burst of shooting, and can otherwise just be a big intimidating threat that the opponent has to try and deal with, that's going to blast away at their models each turn until that happens. Let me know your thoughts on the mighty Land Raider of the Space Marines though. Have they been making their way back into your lists since the points changes? I look forward to hearing your takes on them. As mentioned, a big thank you to ObjectiveMarkers.com for sponsoring the video. If you wanted to check out their fancy clear faction specific objective markers, there'll be links down in the video description below. They've got plenty of ones that could fit in with a whole number of Warhammer armies out there, and are quite nice with their design so you can see the battlefield through them and still measure perfectly to 3 inches around the marker. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos regularly and want to help keep them coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description down below. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early from time to time, names in the end credits for bigger backers, and automatic entry into the regular monthly prize giveaways. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.